Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into what is, frankly, a completely bizarre piece of political drama playing out right now in a place called Makerfield. But stick with me, because we aren't just talking about local politics today. We're going to use this Makerfield microcosm to pull back the curtain on the massive systemic forces that are literally paralyzing the United Kingdom right now. We're exploring why international diplomats are quietly whispering behind closed doors, asking if the UK has simply become ungovernable. It's a massive, heavy question, and to truly understand it, we need to look at the absolute political theater playing out first. So, picture this. Recently, Prime Minister Keir Starmer actually came out and publicly guaranteed his absolute support for the Labour candidate in the upcoming Makerfield by-election. He pledged to be 100% behind them. Now, on the surface, that sounds totally standard, right? A party leader supporting their party's candidate. It happens every day. But as we unpack this, you are going to see that this seemingly standard statement actually masks an incredibly awkward, almost head-spinning reality for the current government. Here is the catch, and it's a huge one. That expected candidate, Mayor Andy Burnham, has a very specific goal, and it's definitely not just to be a local member of parliament. His actual aim is to replace the prime minister. Burnham is widely known to be using this localized election to campaign heavily against the current government's record. He is effectively positioning himself to step in as the next prime minister, potentially within a matter of weeks. So you have a sitting prime minister publicly stating he is 100% behind a guy whose entire platform is built on pointing out exactly how the party has failed in its first few years in power. You literally can't make this stuff up. There's actually a formal term for what we're watching unfold on the ground, a shadow leadership contest. This is an unofficial, behind-the-scenes campaign to oust a sitting leader and seize control. But the crazy part here is that it's happening in full public view. I mean, there hasn't been a formal leadership contest triggered yet, but the maneuvering is absolutely undeniable. It creates this extraordinary dynamic where a random local by-election is suddenly elevated to a high-stakes battle for the absolute top job in the country. To pull this off, Burnham is attempting a dizzying political tightrope walk. He's running a completely bizarre dual strategy. On one hand, he's basically playing a hyper-local game of Monopoly, enthusiastically name-dropping tiny villages and specific streets in Makerfield to prove to the locals that he cares about their immediate issues. Things like fixing local potholes. But on the exact same day, he is simultaneously pitching a sweeping national shadow platform to his real target audience, future Labour leadership voters. He's talking about massive policies like nationalizing utilities, wealth devolution, and reindustrialization. Trying to perfectly sync up those two vastly different pitches is, well, it's a massive challenge. But as anyone who follows politics knows, by-elections are absolute wild cards. Politicians simply cannot control them, and Burnham is facing some incredibly tough hurdles. First off, strict broadcasting fairness rules are going to kick in, completely limiting his airtime to make that grand national pitch, because all the other candidates legally deserve equal time. Second, he's got a long history of wanting to rejoin the EU, but he is running in a heavily Leave voting area. That's a very tricky triangulation. Add to that Reform UK's recent leadership shakeup, bringing in Lee Anderson to fire up their base. And finally, there is the ever-present, very real danger of general voter apathy and protest voting. People might literally just vote against him because they're annoyed they even have to vote again. And honestly, the sheer absurdity of this whole Westminster drama goes even deeper when you look at why this election is even happening in the first place. The seat is only vacant because the previous MP, Josh Simons, stepped down. But how do you actually legally resign from Parliament in the UK? Well, you have to accept a bizarre, archaic, royal title. In this case, he was appointed the Crown Steward and Bailiff of the Three Children Hundreds. It literally sounds like a title straight out of Lord of the Rings, doesn't it? But because you legally cannot work for the king and sit in Parliament at the same time, accepting this obscure, centuries-old office is the official workaround to trigger the exact by-election Burnham is now trying to capitalize on. So where does this all lead? Well, it all comes down to one magic number: 81. Burnham's gamble is incredibly high stakes. Sure, he needs to win this local seat just to get his foot back in the door at Westminster. But winning the seat is just step one. To actually trigger the formal leadership contest he so desperately wants, 81 current members of Parliament must cross the threshold and formally submit letters calling for a new leader. If he wins Makerfield, the pressure on those MPs to hit that magic number of 81 becomes immense. But if he loses, the whole shadow campaign completely collapses in spectacular fashion. But as wildly entertaining as this local political backstabbing is, it's really just a symptom of a much, much larger existential crisis. When international diplomats and global observers look at the UK right now, they aren't just gossiping about Makerfield. They are quietly asking a much bigger, much scarier question. Is Britain simply ungovernable? The UK used to be viewed as the sensible, slightly dull, reliable voice in the corner of the international room. Now, allies are watching this relentless turn of prime ministers and constant party inviting, and they're wondering what on earth has broken inside the British political machine. Because, let's be real, this kind of systemic instability doesn't just happen overnight. We are living in an era of compounding crises. Think about it. We had the global financial crash in 2008, from which, staggeringly, incomes have never fully recovered. The sheer amount of lost economic growth is enormous. Then came the massive societal division of Brexit in 2016, followed by a literal global pandemic in 2020, and then massive energy shocks and wars starting in 2022. It is an exceptionally tough time to govern any country, and this relentless cascade of historic shocks has completely battered the system, resulting in leaders being chewed up and spit out at record speed. But if you dig beneath all those compounding crises, you hit the ultimate structural problem. The harsh, unglamorous reality that is making the country seemingly impossible to lead. There is simply no money left. Historically, when a government got into trouble, a right-leaning leader might just slash taxes to appease angry voters, while a left-leaning leader might boost welfare spending to stimulate things. Today, those levers are completely gone. The UK is facing a massive debt crisis. Politicians are operating in a suffocating financial straitjacket, making it incredibly difficult to actually deliver on the sweeping promises they make to voters, which, of course, just fuels voter disillusionment even faster. And the environment these politicians are operating in, it is uniquely hostile. The accelerants of this political collapse are everywhere. I mentioned the extreme cost of debt servicing. The government spends vast sums of money just paying the interest on its borrowing. But combine that financial strain with our modern instant gratification culture. As observers have rightly pointed out, we expect a hot pizza to arrive at our door in 45 minutes, so voters now expect immediate, visible political results. And when those quick fixes don't materialize, social media and private WhatsApp groups allow backbench MPs to organize rapid, fatal rebellions against their own leaders in a matter of hours. Add in a bunch of unslaughtered sacred cows, untouchable legacy policies that desperately need reform but are politically suicidal to touch, and you have a recipe for total gridlock. Which brings us right back to our friend Andy Burnham, whose whole strategy perfectly highlights a modern campaigning truth. It is incredibly easy to call out problems, but it's so much harder to actually come up with solutions. I mean, it is a piece of cake to point at a massive pothole in Makerfield and shout, "The government has failed you." Literally everyone hates potholes, but it is vastly harder to stand there and explain the complex, expensive structural realities of actually fixing them. Politicians are fantastic at identifying universally hated issues, but they actively dodge explaining the difficult mechanics of solving them. And this illustrates exactly what they are dodging: the avoided trade-offs. Real governance, it requires making impossible, deeply unpopular choices. It's the classic battle of jam today versus jam tomorrow. Do you spend your highly limited budget filling highly visible local potholes today to win votes? Or do you take the completely unglamorous long-term route of funding structural highway maintenance for tomorrow? Do you protect the immediate benefit of older generation pensions, or do you make the incredibly painful choice to slash those benefits to invest in youth opportunities and reduce student debt? These are deep generational divides, and right now, almost no one in power is willing to be honest about the pain required for long-term gain. And why exactly are they so terrified of honesty? Because voters absolutely punish them for it. When you look at the combined polling support for the two traditionally dominant major parties, Labour and the Conservatives, they are currently sitting at under 30%. That means over 70% of the electorate is either actively looking at other parties or is totally undecided. Any politician who steps up and attempts to introduce long-term thinking, or who honestly admits that spending cuts and painful trade-offs are necessary, gets fiercely rejected by an impatient electorate. The political space for honest long-term governance has basically vanished. Which leaves us with a pretty stark, highly provocative thought to end on. If voters consistently refuse to accept the painful trade-offs required for long-term stability, and if politicians are simply too terrified to offer them, what exactly is the catalyst that will force honest politics? Will it actually take a devastating, undeniable economic collapse, or maybe a severe military shock to the system? Something so massive that it forces the public to finally accept that radical, uncomfortable changes are necessary? It's a heavy thought to sit with as we watch the local drama in Makerfield unfold. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that one.